Good morning, everyone, according to your time zone. Welcome to Dear RC's fifth webinar titled Exploring the Transition to Student Learning Outcomes Based Curriculum and Assessments in KPK and Islamabad Capital Territory, Policy Frameworks and Teachers' Implementation Experiences. This webinar is part of Dear RC's series of webinars on building communities of practice in education. I'm Dr. Sahar Shah, and I'm the Senior Research Manager at DARE RC, and I will be your moderator today. The FCTO-funded DARE RC project is an education research program implemented by Oxford Policy Management in partnership with Aga Khan University for educational development and site savers. It is dedicated to enhancing Pakistan's education system through high-quality research and promoting evidence-based policymaking. Now, today's webinar will be based on interesting insights from a very important DARE RC study based on student learning outcomes being conducted by a fantastic team. Just be sharing the core team members, the names of the core team members. Now, today we are joined by amazing researchers from this very team. We have with us Dr. Aliya Khalid. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Aliya Khalid. If you could just display your video. Dr. Aliya Khalid, Assalamu alaikum. Dr. Aliya Khalid has joined us from UK, and she is a senior departmental lecturer in the Department of Education at the University of Oxford. She's a course director of the MSc program in Comparative and International Education and a junior research fellow at Lady Margaret Hall. Her research focuses on equity and policy reform, examining how gender, class, ethnicity, migration, displacement, and environmental disasters shape education in Pakistan and the UK. We are very fortunate to have her with us today. We also joined by another amazing researcher and educationist, Dr. Hameedah Sayani. Dr. Hameedah Sayani, thank you for joining us. Is a senior faculty member and director of CPT and partnerships at Durbin in Karachi, Pakistan. She has over 25 years of international experience across education, finance, and the non-profit sector. In her former role as Chief Executive Officer at Zindagi Trust, Dr. Sayani strengthened academic systems, expanded data-driven decision-making, and improved learning outcomes across multiple schools managed by the Trust. Her current work and research focuses on educational assessment, teacher professional development, and research capacity building. So let's immediately move on to this very important study. And okay, so Dr. Aliya, from a decision maker's perspective, what made this a high priority area to investigate now? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sahar, and thank you for inviting me and Dr. Hameedah. We're really privileged and honored to be here. So I think your question is really important. I'll just give a very quick background to this whole kind of policy issue before we get into, these sort of responses. So student learning outcome as a concept is what is focused on what we get out of the education, so what the outcomes are. So it does focus on examination systems and what they test. If you think about a classroom, what happens in a classroom, and this has been an issue in a lot of countries across the world. So it's not just Pakistan that's dealing with it. So within a classroom, you see that we have a book that has been developed through the curricular framework. Then we have a teacher. Now, when the teacher teaches, she needs to know what the aim of that, so what is the end goal of this teaching or this education that is happening. Now, for us, the end goal is those examinations. What do the examinations do? They test recall. So the way that you teach so that they can do well at the exam is that you have to make them really, really memorize the material. But what happens as a result is that our children, they are then trapped in this box. So you only think that whatever is available content in a book is what education is. So there is not a lot of connection around. They don't know how to connect it with the world. They don't know, out of the box thinking. How does that happen? Because we force them to fit within that box. Now, the student learning outcomes approach, what it does is that it says you change the examination systems so that you test knowledge rather than you test memory. So you cannot attempt those questions, you cannot write those exams if you've been taught with an approach which focuses on how to memorize things and how to memorize content. Now, student learning outcome, therefore, has also attached with it the way that you do pedagogy, OBE. So so what happens there is that in the pedagogy, what we don't understand, or we do understand, but we aren't able, the way that the system is structured at the moment, we aren't able to get to that side, is that idea of knowledge. So there's a skill that is being developed or should be developed as a result of a course. And so that skill level we never reach because our curriculum is only forcing us to do certain things that will then feed into the examination system. So the SLO kind of idea is at some point to decouple, de-link that examination with the book. What does this mean? This means that the children look at the knowledge in the book rather than the material. What does that mean? That also means that children go towards other resources, lectures, other kinds of work, resource books to understand concepts rather than, sort of memorizing the book. Now, this transition, although it feels really amazing, is difficult because our classrooms are differently sort of organized. But I have to say that there is a way conceptually through which it has been used in different countries. Some have had more success than others, and it has been used in even developed economies like the US. So there has been like a different sorts of success, diverse kind of success that we've had in this. Now, when we bring this to Pakistan, and we'll talk about this if the opportunity arises, 2006, we started with changing the curriculum first, putting SLO kind of approach into our framework. Then we slowly transitioned into a stage where in KP at the moment, 100% of the exams are SLO based. And the different provinces, because of SNC and now the national curriculum, all the provinces have to follow the same kind of rule. They are starting the assessments to some percentages, but KP has totally moved to 100% SLO based system. What does that mean? So I think for our project, our approach was more looking at the system because what we found, this is a complex thing for a research project, right? There's so many moving parts. But what we found was that in those assessments, they needed to be work on the curriculum, which they did. They needed to be support for the teachers, which there is some sort of like SLO-based support available through the development sort of departments, DPD and KP. But the problem is when the assessments were 100% sort of moved to SLO, we saw last year, for example, in KP, that some schools reported after the sort of secondary school exam, 9th and 10th, some of the government schools reported as low as 20 or even lower percent of pass rates. And some schools had zero. So now what we are seeing is that the student performance was a big shock. They have been trying to do things. In a decentralized system, I would like to say that the provinces are trying to spend money. There's a lot of money that is being spent on teachers' education, but the outcomes are like this. So it's a very urgent problem. It's not because, why is this urgent? Because A, we're going through the issues of systemic change, implementation issues, assessment practices are very outdated. So not assessment, exam papers, but actually the practice of doing that, who checks it, how much training they have. But actually the biggest problem is that of equity. Because what is happening now is anecdotally, a lot of children who especially come from very marginalized kind of background, they're dropping out because the opportunity cost of school is just too much. And they have to earn, the house has to feed its members. So I think your question of high priority is also in the education system, but also it's a big question of equity at the moment as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aliya, for that very nuanced explanation. Definitely a very important matter. Dr. Hameedah, if SLO reform represents a significant theory of change shift, now where does that theory break down most often once it reaches schools? Kindly shed light on this.
Thank you very much, Sahar. Thank you for the opportunity and having us. Of course, there need to be some considerations even before we get to these reforms reaching schools. I think the first thing that needs to be considered is the decision-making processes and timelines associated with SLO reforms. They required a participatory approach. The literature consistently shows that top-down approaches to reform undermine teacher agency and tend to result in regulatory compliance only, rather than meaningful implementation in letter and spirit. So when the teachers are positioned as passive recipients of reform, their motivation declines, and as a result, there is a loss of ownership, which is reflected in their classrooms. Second thing that needs to be considered is that our data shows that the expectations related to SLO-based teaching and learning were not clearly communicated to the teachers and to the head teachers, who are basically the primary implementers of this of these reforms. Several teachers told us that they were advised that they no longer need to rely on textbooks and could draw on any available resources as long as the SLOs are met. Now, of course, this was quite overwhelming for them. In the absence of clear pedagogical guidance, this created confusion rather than instructional flexibility, which was the aim of this reform. Third, the students, who are the ultimate beneficiaries of of these reforms, they were largely excluded from the transition process. They were not adequately exposed to instruction aligned with the SLO-based teaching and learning, yet they were assessed on under the new expectations. So it is not surprising that their performance was quite dismal on the board examinations. Finally, we feel that SLO-based reform requires a strong strong instructional infrastructure, which includes teacher capacity, curriculum coherence, and sustained professional support to teachers and head teachers. Such reforms cannot be implemented in a single phase. There has to be a realization there it will require some time, multiple iterations, and systems learning, as Dr. Aliya rightly pointed out. So South Africa's experience is, is to be quoted here. They started their transition towards outcomes-based education in late 1990s. However, the system took years to stabilize into a model that was contextually relevant. So in essence, the theory of change breakdowns not because SLOs are conceptually flawed, but because the conditions required for the enactment at school level are not sufficiently developed.
And thank you so much for that insightful explanation, Dr. Hameedah. So just moving on to this from this point, Dr. Aliya, the literature shows gains only under coherent implementation. In Pakistan's context, which coherence conditions are missing? Kindly, if you could share the details with us.
Thank you, Sahar. I think one of the challenges that as a research project also that's trying to understand this complex issue is that there are so many interconnected things. So alignment is not just about you have a policy reform and there's one for, let's say, teachers' education or training, and you look at the impact of that reform. It's a very systems level thing where it's assessment, but pedagogy, but teaching, but for, your assessment and curriculum frameworks. So the misalignment is basically, which is why I think Dr. Hameedah very rightly said that there's an overwhelming, not just for the policymakers, but also what's happening in schools, because there is a misalignment which is system-wide. And like Dr. Hameedah said, we have examples in the world where these things take time, but also where you really need to understand and do things, and you have to do things at the same time, I think. So one needs to understand that there is attention that you need to pay to different parts of the system, and the education itself is an ecosystem of so many parts. But then you have to decide, you're trying to put things in. For example, misalignment of teachers' education, if we talk about it, there are elements in DPD that were included to give them some sense of, SLO and what the demands were. but they weren't sophisticated enough. Then there was work done on the curriculum. Then there's work done on the assessment. So we're moving firstly, in a very strange direction and sequence, but also we're trying to handle a lot of things. So we did come across this misalignment, which was system-wide. But there's some very interesting things that we found, and from our study, for example. And one of them was basically the sort of misalignment of curriculum with the cognitive demand. Now, interestingly, what we found was, and these 100% assessments, they were implemented for 9th and 10th year students. As you know, this is a very crucial stage after which they transition to colleges and potentially then after that universities. So these are high stakes. And when the sort of the assessments were done in that way, the teachers who are teaching the curriculum, who are trying to enact all of this, they firstly don't understand what the assessment is doing. They don't have the exact tools to kind of understand or teach. They've been given some tools, but they have no context of what SLO is, what it's supposed to do. A teacher can actually be, teaching along these lines just because she's a very kind of motivated and engaged teacher. And she would be doing the same things that we would require for somebody to do in such a system. Now, the problem that we've found is very interesting. Dr. Hassan, in his study, with experts and policymakers. So we also interviewed policymakers from across those two regions. We call them experts. They're policy implementers, paper checkers, examination people. So all sorts of departments. We engage with people. And so what they identified was this important stage of transition from primary to secondary. What happens at the secondary stage is that there's a lot of pressure there's a lot of course to cover. You are short on time, strikes are happening, holidays are there, vacations are there, and teachers are really pressurized. They're under a lot of pressure to complete the course, not just complete it, but actually, help students retain it so that they can do the exams. Now, what the issue, the students that transition from primary come to secondary without the required kind of knowledge that would be needed to do well at this stage. Now, what happens then is that the cognitive sort of perspectives of students are also not heard. So there is, Dr. Hassan talks about cognitive load on the students that does not allow, so firstly, it's putting teachers under pressure, but students also will not do well. And ultimately, the teachers who can't teach students who do well, they will also phase out. So it's under a lot of pressure. But then we also feel that the misalignment between teachers' training and assessment demands, so assessment literacy, is also a very nuanced area, which we don't see there. And then another very interesting thing is the assessment design and marking practices. So basically, you can design your papers in a particular way. Teachers can teach in a way that students can write those exams, but who checks them? And are they really familiar with what SLO is demanding of the students? And we're testing the knowledge and skill of the students. So it's a very sophisticated thing. So I think there's a number of misalignments, but I don't want to say it's completely misaligned. I mean, the departments are keen, at least in our experience. We've worked very closely with KP, Department of Education, and ICT also, and they're quite keen and they want to. But I think we're trying to. It's a new kind of change, relatively new since 2006. But they're trying to tweak the system. I don't know, maybe someday we will be able to align it. I would say yes, if we don't give up. But I think it's more about how we're trying to, and we're navigating that alignment rather than the misalignment.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aliya. I think that's really informative. So, Dr. Hameedah, how transferable are international SLO lessons to an exam-driven system such as Pakistan?
Thank you, Sahar. At this point in time, the transferability of international lessons on SLO-based reforms to exam-driven systems like Pakistan is rather limited. While the challenges reported in the literature, in the international literature, are broadly similar. But the solutions that were adopted by other countries may not be applicable to Pakistani context. So international evidence highlights that there are issues such as misalignment between teaching and assessment, reliance on rote learning, and weak formative assessment practices And Pakistan is having similar problems, that they are not very different. However, the solutions adopted in international settings, we cannot simply just transplant them into local context. One key reason for this limitation lies in teacher preparation. In many countries that have adopted outcomes-based education, teachers generally benefit from relatively strong pre-service training programs and are themselves exposed to SLO-based teaching and learning throughout their educational journeys. This enables them to translate outcomes-based principles into classroom practice. In Pakistan, by contrast, individuals entering the teaching profession typically come from an education system that is heavily content-focused, exam-driven. As a result, expectations associated with SLO-based teaching represent a significant pedagogical challenge for those teachers. Other than that, we understand that there is a need for a deep understanding of context. So, one of the elements of, the context that is applicable to Pakistan, I've already discussed about teacher training. Educational settings in Pakistan, they vary quite significantly, not only across provinces, but also across exam boards. So, for example, in Sindh, there are about 7 or 8 exam boards. In KPK, there are 8 exam boards. So, of course, the literature documents that there are inconsistency in assessment practices also, and Dr. Aliya also highlighted that. These provinces also vary in terms of their governance structures and institutional capabilities. Effective transferability, therefore, requires careful adaptation to local realities. What is true for us? What is suitable to our context? Surface level policy borrowing, we can do that, but that is, that is seldom successful. Finally, I feel that international lessons also point to the importance of adopting a systems level perspective, and we have been advocating for that, and we have been talking about it again and again. So SLO-based reforms are effective only when implemented as a system-wide change, rather than isolated curriculum or assessment adjustments, which has largely been the case in Pakistan. Strengthening teacher education programs, clarifying governance requirements, understanding power dynamics between various institutions that are in the educational landscape of Pakistan is crucial in ensuring that these reforms are successful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hameedah. That's extremely informative once again. So, Dr. Aliya, coming back to you, where is the weakest link in the implementation chain from syllabus to exam paper to classroom? If you could shed some light on that.
Thank you, Sahar. Sahar, I would like to think that it's thinking about what are the areas that need more support, and where is it that we can do a bit more thinking in this system. SLO-based education has been implemented to some extent, at least not theoretically. Dr. Ilyas, who's another of our brilliant, alongside Dr. Hassan, senior researchers, he talks about how, there's a shift, but without a paradigm shift. So you need to change the way that we understand pedagogy and the way we implement education. It's a question on, why are you teaching the kids? What is it for? So I think it is important to understand that the reform has been implemented. We are seeing that things are happening. I can't say that there's no teachers training. Nobody's doing anything. I can't say that policymakers are not thinking about, examinations or curriculums. Things are being done. So I think the areas would be, where is it in today's time, in the stage that we are, that we can put in as much support as possible. And so I think our project, sort of shows us a lot of things that could be improved, or some very interesting experiences as well. But certainly, I think teachers' preparation, that is the heart of everything. And I think I mean, across Pakistan at least, there is a recognition that teacher preparation is really important. Now, Dr. Uzma, another of our brilliant researchers who worked with teachers, she talks about how we see these inspirational stories. So one has to, I was doing a session with some teachers in a school, and they said, we don't have any time. And I said, actually, you know, the really good teachers, the one that you remember, who stayed with you all through your life, that teacher was automatically teaching in this way. So this doesn't need to be a sophisticated kind of technical thing. It's not a technical thing. It's a paradigm shift. It's a way of understanding what I'm giving out of this book. You know, so teachers preparation, I think, is one thing that we found is there's misalignment in that. But in doing that shift, I mean, researchers, we have a role to play, right? Practitioners have a role to play. And I think now is a good time where there is more receptivity. Policymakers are more keen to listen. And I think it's a good time. But certainly, I think we need to put a lot of effort into this. Now, I'm not saying that effort is not being put, because the biggest problem is that regions are spending. They are spending millions of rupees on teachers training, but the outcome is not there. So what we need to do is that we need to, and I'm pleased that programs like TARE RC are facilitating this kind of support where we can work with the government. We can deliver things. So we have been able to collaborate with, let's say, these departments based on the funding and, you know, what we were doing. So I think one of the things to remember is that is the case, but we also need to see that this is a good time and support can be given. The second important thing, I think, is, which I talked about in detail and I won't repeat, is the curriculum overload. So for example, now that different regions or provinces are going towards SLO-based assessments, there are certain changes and strategies that they're using. For example, Punjab has a smart curriculum, which then I don't know how it works, but there's less curriculum than the other regions. So KP, the biggest problem is that all these changes have happened and teachers still have to teach those 12 chapters with all of those attached things. So it just puts more pressure. They don't have time to think about this. So I think very clearly thinking about curriculum and thinking, not just saying teachers need to be trained and taught, seeing how do you facilitate those teachers? How is it that they can have the space and the principals, the teachers, and, you know, the other people? And I think also one important thing that we haven't talked so much about is assessment literacy. So do teachers actually understand what assessments are for? And then when the assessments are done, the people who then mark those papers and examinations, what kind of literacy they have in this, or SLO specific literacy. So I would say these three things we think are the areas where we can and should put more attention, especially where we are.
All excellent points, Dr. Aliya. Thank you for sharing them. So you mentioned policymakers, and I have a question for Dr. Hameedah. So how should policymakers interpret the early failure rates regard to this reform as transitional costs or as warning signs?
Yeah, so they should both be considered as transitional costs and warning signs, the latter being more pronounced, of course. But they should definitely not be considered as an indicator of student inability. Unfortunately, we do have a tendency that, you know, when the results are not what we desire, then we would say that, well, students don't study, they don't work hard, and that is why they get the results, such results. So, of course, you know, these results are not indicative of that for sure. So when you look at the assessment literature, it talks about sawtooth effect. So I'm talking about, you know, transitional costs. So the sawtooth effect occurs when there is a change in an exam pattern, or when new examination regimes are introduced. So this effect suggests that student performance declines at first when new exams are introduced, new exam patterns are introduced. The performance get better as the time goes by, and you know, teachers and students become more familiar with assessment, and then the performance stabilizes. This may not be an indicator of student ability, but rather a result of, you know, unfamiliarity. In the case of you know, the the exam results, the dismal student performance may indicate to some extent, not to a greater extent, but to some extent that students were unfamiliar with the SLO-based assessment. The results should definitely be considered a warning sign. These are an indicator of traditional instruction practices which do not meet the rigor that SLOs require. It also indicates misalignment between instruction and practice, as well as gaps in SLO attainment when the students move from primary grades to the secondary grades. One suggestion that or recommendation we would like to offer is that exam boards, they collect a lot of data. There's a lot of data that they have. However, it seems that the data is not put to good use. So if the data is put to good use and is analyzed, it will definitely enable policymakers as well as schools and head teachers and teachers themselves to realize that what are the underlying gaps in learning, student learning. And of course, that would mean that there could be targeted interventions, professional development interventions to design programs that are well suited to the needs of the teachers as well as students.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hameedah, for sharing that. Very relatable. So, Dr. Aliya, where is the opportunity cost highest in slowing the reform or in continuing without sufficient support?
So I think, Sahar, if you ask me honestly, I don't think there's an opportunity cost. Because if you think about a system that has been based on rote learning since, and some of this is colonial legacy, right? So I don't think there's an opportunity cost. Our education system really needs, kind of a redoing in that sense. So, I mean, if you ask me, I would say there isn't any opportunity cost. We are trying, and whenever you try and you bring a change, there is some cost you pay. But for that change and that system and that hope, I think it is needed and it is required. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is the kind of idea of should we stop or should we continue? Now, what happens in Pakistan, especially with education, unfortunately, the most important element of a nation of the future is actually experiments are being performed on education. We see new curriculum, policies change, this happens, that happens. So there's a lot of change. You already have a lot of change in here. So we know that the political sort of cycle is also very short. Somebody may not have this as a priority and then things change. So if you ask me, I would say this is exactly how you will improve this. Whether or not you call it SLO in the future, you try and scrap it like SNC we said, but then national curriculum has similar things and before that too. But this is an effort. We should see it in terms of the paradigm that we are supposed to shift, in the words of Dr. Ilyas. So I think the question of stopping or continuing is not the correct question because we already have an issue with the continuation. So the problem is that change happens very fast. So like I said, I think, and what is important is that when we think of reform and policy, so if you ask me, I would say it should continue. That's the short answer. But then the thing is that we sometimes imagine that policy is like a static thing. Somebody has just, developed a policy and they just have, sort of implemented it, which actually happens. I'm not denying that it doesn't happen. But policy is it's a dialogue. And there are policy makers and then implementers to the extent of teachers and students. So there is a connection. The system is moving. So our project was designed around the concept of system approach. So the system is moving. So we would like to see this as policy, not just reform as a document, but actually our communication and dialogue with the people who have the power to create policy, but also, implementers and on all levels. So what has happened here is that we have been thinking about this in terms of not the opportunity cost, but actually accepting it. This is what has happened. These are the good things about it. And it's not like this is impossible to do. Now we've implemented this and now we can make those changes. But that has happened a lot in dialogue with the people. Like, for example, the Secretary of Education in KP, Mohammed Khalid Saab, We worked very closely, the director of DPT, Matahir Saab, we worked very closely to then think about, how do you lower that opportunity cost, whatever it is. So the answer is not stop doing it or continue. The answer is, where do you put all your energy into what can be done better? So I think that would be a more valid concern.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aliya. Much appreciated. And definitely it resonates clearly. So may I ask, why was comparing KPK and ICT analytically valuable for drawing decision relevant insights for the study?
Yeah. So all provinces and ICT, they started the transition towards SLO reform at the same time. So which was in 2006, and then this was strengthened further in the national curriculum 22-23. So we have a baseline. We say that all the provinces started at the same time, although the progression towards adopting SLO, that has been kind of uneven. As far as both the KPK and ICT is concerned, we are actually comparing two different scales. So if you look at ICT in terms of scale, it is smaller. It's a federal system. It's more manageable in size. It has clear administrative structures, better defined systems, better governance, and probably sufficient resources. But on the other hand, when you look at KP, it's a larger system, complex administrative and institutional structures. There are resource constraints and significant geographical diversity. So, especially considering the newly merged areas. And then it also has urban centers like Peshawar. If you look at the centralization, the extent of centralization, ICT is more centralized. KPK is less centralized. For example, as I mentioned, that there are 8 examination boards. So it's more decentralized, and therefore there's lack of consistency across assessment systems. Why this comparison was important? We need to understand that scaling up certain interventions that have been tried and tested in ICT, and they may have worked there, that may not be the case in a KPK. So that comparison, yes, we can learn from ICT, but we cannot be certain that things that worked there in ICT will work for KPK because of all the reasons that I just stated.
Can I just quickly come in here, Hameedah?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I think, the question of analytical importance is really interesting because we were also looking at analytical transferability. So what we see as the similar thing is that both the regions have been committed to the SLO reform. So 2006, then it was a national, debate. So of course, the federal government took it on. So did other provinces, including KP. Decentralization happened in 2010, which meant that the provinces actually had control over their decisions. KP stuck, they stayed with SLO. So the commitment was there. But the way that we also see it is that it's a comparison of two very complex systems, but two very different systems. So it's a case study of a system, which is the federal, has very few schools, has a very established structure and system, has the funds, the schools are much more resourced. So it has that kind of a structure, but it's small, right? And if you look at KP, like Dr. Hameedah said, it is basically more, so the scale of it is big, which means it's another system in its own. There are many divisions within that. There's thousands of teachers. And then you have that in itself is a mini system. So when you're trying to align that system to something like that, it's a complex case. Analytically, why is this important? Because we are looking towards the practices that can actually support the transition to these systems. So for example, if you take the example of the US versus China, so that's the education system in the US is quite scattered, and like almost like decentralized, like Dr. Hameedah said. China is very much centrally controlled. So if you look at the analytical transferability of what we are now looking at, two different systems, then at some scale, you can also make sense of it from the perspective of the other country. So there's analytical transferability in our strategic choice of working in ICT and then working in KP. I have to say that we found inspirational stories in both regions. KP, I mean, our researcher, Dr. Uzma, says that teachers said that they became from curriculum developers to, deliverers to curriculum facilitators. Dr. Munir, who's our other research, senior researcher, he talks about principals and school head teachers and how they sort of navigated the school ethos and managed their own staff and teachers and created the whole environment of the school in which this could be done. So what I'm trying to say is, although the two regions, if you just look at them very superficially, you would feel that one is more resourced, the other one isn't doing well. So yes, if you don't have resources, this is what you do. But actually what we found was there is such practices that actually align with these principles that we're talking about, and they're quite so similar in that sense. So we see this as the comparison means we see them as similar, but a system that is completely different. And in that, we have the analytical transferability. Sorry to interrupt you, Hameedah.
Thank you, Dr. Hameedah and Dr. Aliya, for that explanation. It makes absolute sense. So coming to scalability, which elements of the reform are scalable nationally and which require contextual adaptation?
Okay, so I think scalability is the biggest issue. And it's not exactly, I think, scalability of the reform, because the reform is now there and all the regions, all the provinces have to align with that reform. So they have to do it. But I think the scalability question is the question of what moving parts need help and what is the way in which you can provide this help so that it reaches thousands of teachers in this government system across Pakistan. Now, this is a big ask, and this is really difficult. But I want to give an example of what happened with us during our our project. What we hadn't put into the project became the most interesting part for us. Of course, the research is also very interesting, and we're finding very detailed things. But actually, as we worked with teachers and head teachers, we realized, and we had senior teachers from all levels, like the government system, we realized that teachers now had to teach in this way. They were keen. They wanted to understand what was happening. Like Dr. Hameedah said, they didn't have enough kind of knowledge or information about what was happening. You need to know, why is it that you're being asked to teach SLO or in this way, where you're so stuck and where nobody has really figured out exactly a formula that can be copied and pasted in a context, which I think is a very a defeated cause in itself, because it doesn't work like that. But so what we saw was that the teachers were very keen. You would be amazed at the kinds of teachers that we interacted with. And you see the constraints that they were also under. So they actually suggested and requested, and for us, this was like a very key demand, for us to develop something that was really simple. So we used our first meeting. When you have your researcher training, we usually make it an event in which we also invite as many possible participants. So we had all the teachers and we talked about this issue, and we talked about what we are going to do in the planning stage. So they were involved. And at that stage, they said, how about, this was very helpful. A lot of things that you said, we couldn't make the connections, but because we didn't know what the background was. Why don't you create something really simple for us so that we know and we can share this with others, because there's only so many people that can be in this room. So the thinking started from there. We started meeting with the education department, the Secretary of Education in KP, because our teachers training or our resource pack training for that region has happened. We're going to conduct our ICT training in possibly April. So we started having conversations with them, and they said, actually, this is the biggest issue now. How can you support us? So we said, we have a team prepared. If you want, we can deliver these sort of trainings, and you can, and the idea was that we connect the University of Peshawar, the School of Education, with them, so that there is some kind of an agreement and they can provide the human resource that will then help them. So we had to think about also continuity in that, right? And sustainability. But it was actually Khalid Saab's idea that you can only put so many teachers in a room. We've got thousands of teachers. We should think about something that you can do at scale. So he suggested, firstly, we thought about doing a webinar, but the cost was too high in the sense that there could be connectivity issues and other problems. So we ultimately then decided on doing recorded sort of lectures. Now, we developed a resource pack, and the resource pack addresses year 9 and 10. What does this have? The resource pack has a very simple description or, sort of explanation of why, what SLO is, what, why, and how. Dr. Ilyas kind of gave us this nice sequence. What is SLO? Why is it there? What it can do? Very simply and briefly. That was brief. And then how do you teach, in line with SLOs? So what we did was this pedagogic element was stable. Then we took examples of, let's say, year 9, one topic of biology, and we demonstrated what we were saying, why is the teaching, the how was the example of that lecture delivery. So what is the teaching plan? What are the activities that the teacher will do? So we basically gave a sample of how one topic could be taught based on SLOs. Like I said, we don't have to show them how to teach everything. The idea is that SLO is a way of teaching. And so we gave the example, and we did the same for 9 and 10 and each and every compulsory subject, 8 of them, right? And then we created, to supplement that, we created videos. So we have total 16 videos, one for year 9, each subject, which does the same. First, there is a description of how we give examples, how you can teach and what does it mean teaching with SLOs. Then there's a sample lecture in which teacher is using different resources, and we've made sure that the resources are things you can find at home, like a plate in which you put a tomato or something like that. So if you're talking about food groups, so everything that we show in there is nothing that will require you to have lab equipment or things like that. Even the physics lectures are like that. So we created that, and then, so there's a resource and there's a lecture each. Now, why is this connected to scalability? Because so we've got the lectures ready, they've been edited and everything, the resource pack is ready, we just have to deliver them to the Secretary of Education. Now, the plan is that going forward, they will be uploading this onto the teachers' portals, that they have access to. What will happen is, from what I know, their plan is that they'll have a pre-test, which tests this knowledge, then they'll have to look at the lecture, and then a post-test. And based on those results, they will then give them a certificate. A certificate will be issued to say something like SLO base. They've done some kind of a training in that. Now, this is to ensure that the videos are seen with interest, or at least even if you're playing it in the background, you're listening to something. So what I'm suggesting is identifying which are the areas that are the most profitable or that can cut the opportunity cost the most, and which are the areas that we are now identifying, working on them, but on the areas developing things that can be rolled out at scale. Now, what does this mean? This means at their own time, teachers can actually be updated, across Pakistan. Another thing that we are suggesting is that because DPD, which is the Directorate of Professional Development in KP, they do the induction trainings of teachers and then in-service trainings. So we're suggesting that this pack should be put into the system where, let's say, school leaders who are responsible for 6 schools, they can basically, do refreshers of that with the school teachers. You just have to run it for 2 hours and you're done. So I guess scalability would come from these kinds of connected initiatives that come out of research.
Dear Dr. Aliya, thank you so much for that extensive explanation and amazing work that's gone behind that. Given the evidence, Dr. Hameedah, would you like to highlight what should policymakers now stop doing, start doing, or do differently as a result of this evidence and experience?
Thank you, Sahar. So I'll try and keep my answer very, very short and straightforward. The slide already shows what we are suggesting. So first, they should stop assuming that curriculum and assessment reform automatically will change classroom practices. and assuming that teachers already have the skills to implement SLOs and no additional training is required. And also that existing accountability frameworks and governance mechanisms are sufficient to implement SLO reforms. What they should start thinking about is giving importance to what goes on in the classroom. And we have highlighted it again and again, and Dr. Aliya has mentioned that whatever happens in the classroom is very, very important. In addition to that, I think started using formative assessment to guide instruction, because if the teachers are implementing formative assessments or using formative assessments in their classrooms, they would exactly know where their students need support. And based on that information, they can, change they can adopt their instruction. Other than that, I think policymakers should start recognizing teacher agency and the instruction leadership that is provided by head teachers, because eventually these are the implementers on ground. So if you do not recognize their agency, then your implementation would not bear fruits. Consider addressing issues like curriculum overload, teacher shortages, overcrowded classrooms. That was highlighted as one of the main issues why teachers were unable to deliver lessons based on SLO expectations, and of course some resource constraints. Technology was also highlighted, or lack of technology in the classroom was also highlighted as a challenge. Other than that, I think we should start using assessment data to guide our interventions. What do we should do differently? Train teachers differently. So Dr. Ali already mentioned that we are spending millions of rupees in training the teachers. Of course, teacher training is a very expensive endeavor to undertake, and we are spending money. However, we are not seeing results. That means that the existing teacher training models are not working. If you really want them to work, then maybe something needs to change. We also need to look into the teacher preparation programs. Where do they stand? I'm talking about both pre-service and in-service teacher training programs. There are lessons to be learned from other provinces. So, for example, SIN's initiative of teachers' license. That is, a very effective mechanism to ensure that teachers have the ability to deliver their lessons effectively in their classrooms, and even going beyond that, talking about assessments. And other than that, we do have some national institutions such as IBCC, and we should leverage that so that we can support assessment mechanisms more effectively. And of course, when all the exam boards, when they come together on this particular platform of IBCC, I'm sure there are critical lessons to be learned.
Thank you so much for Dr. Hameedah. Very important lessons. So, dear audience, if you would like to pose any questions in the chat box, it is open for your questions. Kindly, mention your name and maybe your organization or your role, professional role. We are open for Q&A now, and there is a QR code being displayed on the screen which takes you to a feedback form. We would like to receive your feedback on the webinar and your views. Also, another point is the Dear RC website contains very interesting blogs related to this study. I would recommend kindly go to our website and explore it. All the blogs are connected to our studies, and a lot of other information is there related to this study, and we have 29 other studies going on simultaneously on different topics. So right now, if we would like to hear from you, if you have any questions related to this particular study and what has been discussed so far, looking forward to your questions.
Sahar, while we wait for the questions, I do apologize. This is the first thing I should have said. I really want to acknowledge the dynamic team that we had a privilege to work with. Alongside my co-PI, Dr. Hafiz Mohammed Inamullah, a very true visionary, but there's one person that I really want to acknowledge, and that's Dr. Shakil Ahmed. He's been managing the project, and he's been the real kind of force behind everything that has happened. But alongside that, we've got early career researchers from the Institute of Education, University of Peshawar, who have, I can't tell you how motivated they were and how hard they've worked in the fields, and they feel for the field, they feel for the schools. So I really want to acknowledge that even though we are sitting here, we are speaking on behalf of those people, and we wish that all of them could be here. But I just want to acknowledge that this would not be possible. I mean, it's easy to talk about these things, but the huge work that has gone behind that, that's only been achieved through the support of that team.
I know, absolutely, Dr. Aliya. I think that is so important. And all these people and the core team members, I've seen the list. It's quite amazing. And the way all of you have worked together, the team. Yes, we can see the work happening. Is one of our most inspiring studies happening with Data RC. So thank you for mentioning that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so looking at the chat box, if we don't have any questions, we're going to wait for another 5 minutes. And it means that our speakers really explained everything really well. So no one has any queries. But I think we have some upcoming questions. Just a minute. Okay, someone is asking for the feedback form link. It is on the, it's displayed on the screen. Can you see that? Acha, you're saying we need to post it on the chat box. Okay, I'm literally handling multiple screens. Maybe for y'all, you can do that. If it's possible, could you do that? Thank you.
Sahar, can there be a section on your feedback link where if people think of other questions, they can maybe put them in and we can look at
the feedback form does contain a question where other queries and they can put their, okay, so Prayal is going to put, paste the feedback form link in the chat box as well. You can even scan this QR code if possible, if you have mobile phones, and it will take you to the form as well. Okay, so we have a question by Nadia Jahan, who's mentions very interesting study and the insights from KPK. I am interested to know what are the opportunities for teachers from other provinces to learn from your best practices. So Dr. Aliya, Dr. Hameedah, any of you could respond to that.
Very important question. Dr. Hameedah, would you like to go first?
Please go ahead, Aliya.
Achha. So I think there are, and like we said, we looked at analytical transferability, which means that the things that we are now finding out, they should be applicable, but we are going, as we're saying this, so we had a component of working with teachers, then head teachers, then, experts. So I think for teachers, what we have realized so far is that there needs to be we need to just take away that fear of what SLO is, because it's a change and it's really difficult because teachers already do not have enough support. So I think simple messages like the example that I give to some teachers when I speak with them, I sometimes do sessions with them to just give them the basics of SLO. I say that don't think, although when we have to talk about SLO, we have to make sure that we have a strong foundation, and we have to let you know that this is not happening in a vacuum. But please do not take SLO as if it's a very technocratic, very difficult new thing and a deep philosophy that we have to engage in. It's just teaching in a way that you make your curriculum come alive. So like, for example, there must be 1 or 2 teachers in your life, if you're lucky, 2, but 1 at least, I hope. When you think of your success, you think about those teachers. So I think what is really important is to, clarify that paradigm shift is not a beast, but actually it's a way of teaching. And I think that's a message that teachers should also take away. So for example, a teacher could teach seed germination. And interestingly, my very good friend, Salma Alam, actually gave the same example in her article in the newspaper, but I also give the same example. I think we are brain twins, that when you teach seed germination, you could look at the book, the pictures, diagrams. What used to happen was students were required to also draw those diagrams, and you could say, this is a petal, this is how it is connected. Or you could ask your children to go home, take or bring a glass bottle and sow a seed And as it grows, you could see. So we used to do that in cotton, wet cotton. So our mother, who's my mother, who's also a teacher, she used to make us do those things. So as the seeds started growing, the roots used to start grow first. So that is your lesson. First, the roots grow. Then the shoots would come up and then it would drop the initial seed. And so there you go. You see all of that. So in a sense, when teachers used to, for example, if you're talking about a vacuum and there was an experiment that people used to do, like, have like water in a tray, invert a glass, and in that glass, light up a candle, it sucks up all the water. So it was like a fun trick that our teacher used to do. But in those ways, what you're doing is you are turning your wheel and thinking, okay, I'm teaching, but how do I make it come alive and be connected to what they see around them? So the materials, the things, because what they learn through that system is what will stay. So for example, they can then describe other things, knowledge bases, because they have seen it happen, they can describe the connections with other things around them. So it's a very expanded way of thinking. So I think that is one, if there's one learning that we've found, and they will be specific, and we hope that departments of teachers education and training can take these very simple resource approach and can set them into a system. They will become very preliminary at one stage, but you need to do that now in this stage. But importantly, the fear of SLO, that has to go. And we need to realize it's like we're going back to the previous times when teachers were teaching because they were motivated, they were respected. Unfortunately, in this neoliberal education system, teachers are not respected in the same way. So I think that would be the biggest lesson that I would say needs to be shared. It's not a big theoretical, technical kind of idea. It's simply being the teacher that used to make it fun and more relatable.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Aliya. So true. How can one teach without having an SLO? Okay, so Sadia Khan asks, very informative session on KP. I hope technology is leveraged to bring unanimity and consistency in the implementation of a long-term systemic reform. PIs do discuss the government's take on system-wide reform regarding teacher education, assessment of SLOs, and monitoring. And I'll just pose another question as well, and you can take that as well. It's by Hina Amin. Very interesting study. I wonder why to compare with KPK context with ICT in terms of resources and infrastructure, and why not Punjab or Sindh maybe? So,
Very
okay.
good question. So, Dr. Hameedah, would you like to take
Okay,
one of them?
I will take the first question. I think that the government's take on a systems-wide approach, of course, that is quite visible, as Dr. Aliya said, that we have been in touch with the government, and we have seen that there is an uptake of whatever findings we have received through this particular study. As far as assessment is concerned, they're already working on it. It's just that they need to tighten up certain systems to make it work. As far as teacher education is concerned, I mentioned about the teacher licensing exam in Sindh, and there is appetite in other provinces also to have a similar intervention. So hopefully we will see something similar in KP as well. Aliya, you can now take the second one. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Hameedah. So, Hina, this is a very excellent question. So, my area of work is international and comparative education. So, there's comparison in the title of the field, and so we spend a lot of time trying to now, make our students and people understand what comparison means. And comparison could be, it doesn't mean that you're comparing one against the other. It's that you are taking different parts of knowledge and trying to extrapolate from that the learnings that can come ahead. So earlier on, it used to be, we used to compare systems. One is more developed, the other one is not developed. And that comparison wasn't valid. We have taken that as one of the elements for the two different studies, but actually, it's not because one has less resource and one has a better infrastructure. It's the analytical transferability, because what we feel is that the governments are actually doing things. Things are happening. Now, what KP represents is actually, functioning in a different kind of structure and constraint structure. But interestingly, it is functioning. there are things happening. And we find that out as we sit in classrooms, as we speak with teachers, head teachers, with the other people who are sort of within the different levels of the implementation, policy making, practice, etc. side. So I guess the comparison, although the word comparison is kind of misleading in today's time, these comparisons can actually be very ethically situated. What are the historical changes? So we're taking the temporal element of it. And we're also, so these two regions are basically, if we could have chosen, as you know how research is, we could have chosen two very relatable and two very similar regions. And then we could have said, but actually research shows us that that's a very sort of uninformed way of thinking about comparison, because education is not, cannot be conducted, or the interventions can't be conducted as if they were happening in a lab. So what we saw that, RCTs, randomized controlled trials, where interventions were tried to, they were used and they were like copy and pasted in different contexts, it has backfired. Education sort of issues are decades old, internationally present, and lots of money is being spent, but it's not happening because every context is so different. But doesn't mean that you can't study in both of those regions. It means the conditions are different. So there's a lot of learning for us to see, okay, if a system is more huge, large, and more scattered, what happens in that system? And the messages from that, so our question is, how do you make it work? What are the lessons to be taken away? I think this approach needs to be sort of communicated, that we never took the approach that we need to change the system. We took the approach that what do we learn from what is happening in the system and take it back to policy and change the way that we're doing things. Because for us, those are the experts. So the comparison between ICT and KP was a very interesting one, because it's giving us information on two different systems. And, research could be done on two similar systems. But I think you can never claim that they're similar, because conditions would be so different, either historically or, in the practices that are happening. So, but then one strongest thing was that these two sort of regions, they were very committed for the SLO reform. So consistently worked on that. So we see that commitment. And so therefore we can track the maturity of this SLO kind of policy reform. It's not even a reform. It's almost a shift. It happens here and there very sporadically. So we could trace it back, but they were aging at the same time, started at the same time. I don't know if I've answered your question.
I think you have, because Hina just responded, well explained. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Aliya. It's a lesson for all of us, actually, the way you're explaining. Okay, so Sher Zaman is asking if only 20% are the successful in your project assessments, and how to meet, in the bracket it says strategy, maybe, the wide gap between the desired and tested learning objectives and what we actually teach. I think that's the question. Yeah.
Hameedah, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
So I think that the reference to 20% is to the first slide, which says that only 20% of the students passed in the secondary board examinations. I think this is what Pierre Zaman is referring to. But of course, we cannot, as Dr. Aliya said, that we cannot stop our intervention or our reforms because the secondary results were poor and students did not perform well. It's as we said that it's a process, it's a journey, and I gave an example of South Africa. They started their reform process in 1997, I think, and since then they have adapted their education system to suit the needs of outcomes-based education. So for us, of course, it is that we have to keep on going. It would require fine-tuning. It would require time. It would require multiple iterations, which will then enable us to get to a point where we actually want to be.
Thank you. If I may add to that, I just wanted to say that when we talk about SLOs and we look at international studies, sometimes, and I've been asked this question by teachers, we get demotivated and we say, why are we doing this? So to be very honest with you, working on this project and this sort of concept, I think I'm going to continue working on it till my last day, because I feel that in spirit, this is what we need. And SLO is giving us this opportunity of rethinking our system. In the time of AI, universities across the world are thinking about why is education there? What is it for? I mean, Oxford is thinking about the same thing because we were testing something. We never paid attention to what we were testing because what we test will have to align with what we are teaching and how we are teaching. So the time of AI, plagiarism, and all those issues, they have like really jolted established and very developed systems like Oxford University, for example. So I guess this SLO move is almost the same as that bigger kind of very developed systems struggles that we're seeing today. So I think it is really, and we've seen amazing examples. We have got 2 papers almost ready and 2 others coming out. So we've talked in detail about these things. Now, coming to the 20% success rate, Dr. Hameedah actually, answered this very well, but I think you've asked a very specific and very kind of deep question. So the 20% pass rate just demonstrates how there was a misalignment between, or a systemic misalignment. Exams were there, teachers were being given something. It wasn't like they suddenly pasted the exams there. Curriculum had changed, but actually the pass rates were very low. Some government schools reported 0% pass rate, so everybody failed. And anecdotally, we heard that actually students started dropping out, in government schools when you come from poor families. So I think that is just to demonstrate that but now, it's like when you have your formative exams, for example, tests before your final exam, what are those tests for? They identify what your weaknesses are so that you can, for example, if I did really poorly on multiplication, in the final exam, that is where I put most of my attention. So I guess after the assessment and this kind of issue that, emerged, now is the time where we see, okay, so what's happening? What are the issues? So I think it's a difficult thing, but it is urging us to do that. Now, how do we meet the learning gap is a very, very important question. And I'm really pleased that you've talked about learning outcomes. So learning outcomes in the way of the concept is what the teachers will use as a formative, kind of approach. So when you prepare students for the final one, like after a session, for example, let me say this, we say learning outcomes and we say formative assessments. They just seem to be so huge and you think I'm overburdened. How do I do that? But let me just give an example. So when I teach something and I say something, what do I do? At the end, I ask some questions. And I ask students, okay, so what did that mean? When they give me the answer, then I understand if I've delivered it in a way that they've understood. So what do usually good teachers do is they try to adjust their approach according to how the student can actually, understand. And they keep testing with like questions, ask a question, ask somebody to, explain what has been taught or said. That is the method of quizzing in SLO. So the learning objective is basically teachers to be able to sort of have this mental space to design those little things, the right questions to test if the students have received the knowledge. So I think the gap between exam and the learning outcomes, it's huge, but it's not impossible. Like I said, we talk about techniques, peer group discussion in SLOs. What is peer group? You say, turn to your, we used to call them partners. So on the same desk, 2 people used to sit, turn to them and, talk about this, draw this together or something. That's peer learning. So that is one of the methods for SLO. So what SLO does is that it systematically gives you options of doing it in different ways. So I guess, it's a bit to do with also the fear of SLO, but not getting enough support, not understanding SLO. But I think that distance of testing to learning, there's a long distance that we have to cover. But I think you can't say that I'll only work on assessment literacy. I'll only work on pedagogy and these assessments. It won't work. You have to lessen the pressure of the teachers and the students. So in a sense, it's a system. We will work throughout the system and we're trying to do that. And with that, hopefully that distance will shorten.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aliya and Dr. Hameedah, for joining us today on today's webinar. Extremely insightful, helpful, and informative. Makes us think about education. And yes, it's a system-wide change. So true. You cannot just pick up one part and start working on it and expect it to go well. So thank you for your efforts and your insights and everything that you're doing in this regard. Much appreciated. not only as part of Dare RC, but for the students, for education. So if we don't have any other questions, thank you, audience, for joining us today and sticking with us for so long. And do visit our website again for very interesting blogs and articles related to all the research that's happening in the field of education in Pakistan under this program. And take care of yourself.
Sahar, if I may
We'll be
say
signing off.
that,
Yeah.
thank you, Sahar. If I may say, we also published a lot of newspaper articles, and the idea was
Right.
that we really wanted the public to also have a sense, because we see this anxiety with parents also, which is the element that we didn't touch in the sort of study. But parents are also anxious because of this. So we started publishing newspaper articles. And we also target Urdu as well as English newspapers. So please do look out for that. And I think that
Yes.
information, Sahar, we
Yes.
can also provide on your website.
Definitely. That will be very helpful. Definitely. Thank you for mentioning that. So thank you once again, everyone, for
Thank you,
joining in.
everyone.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Have a nice
Take
day.
care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.